¿Podrías empezar tal vez contextualizando la charla? Porque es importante hablar obviamente,
Sí,
las
sí.
elecciones presidenciales se aproximan, pero específicamente en el contexto de esta parte fronteriza, porque es importante dar esta parte.
Estoy aquí porque la elección presidencial en México va a ser determinante para el futuro del país. No es una elección cualquiera, es una en la cual se anticipa si las tendencias electorales continúan como lo han manifestado las encuestas hasta el momento. El Partido Revolucionario Institucional regresará al poder después de tan solo 2 elecciones democráticas, después de una alternancia que ha durado 12 años. Y a mi juicio, el regreso del PRI entrañaría una severa regresión política para un país que apenas empieza a consolidar su democracia, la cual vería afectada negativamente por el regreso de un partido clientelar, un partido que sigue siendo corrupto, un partido que no se ha modernizado a sí mismo en los últimos 12 años. Y es importante hacer sensible a un público estadounidense y fronterizo de ese riesgo. Y hablar también de por qué regresa el PRI después de una guerra contra el narcotráfico que a los ojos de muchos mexicanos ha resultado ser una guerra fallida, con 50,000 muertos, y eso está llevando a que se piense con cierta nostalgia con respecto al pasado, se piense en la búsqueda de un gobierno de mano firme, de mano dura, que pueda restablecer el orden y la seguridad en un país que lo ha perdido. Y creo que por ello, como lo argumentaré esta noche en mi presentación, México se encamina hacia una lamentable putinización. Actualmente la democracia se asocia con la anarquía, con el caos, y así como la Rusia de Yeltsin fue sacada, la Rusia de Yeltsin votó después de él por encumbrar a alguien que representaba el viejo régimen, por esa añoranza de la mano firme. Creo que en México muchos electores se encaminan en esa misma dirección, con costos, a mi juicio, muy altos, porque ese PRI con la cara bonita de Enrique Peña Nieto sigue siendo el PRI dinosaurico, que tan solo se ha colocado una fachada detrás de la cual están parados muchos de los viejos intereses que hicieron del PRI un partido clientelar, corporativo, un partido que sigue ejerciendo el poder de manera arbitraria y sin rendición de cuentas y sin representatividad política real a nivel de los estados, muchos de ellos que bajo gobiernos priistas se han convertido en archipiélagos autoritarios. Y me preocupa que el PRI a nivel federal empiece a coartar muchas de las libertades democráticas y a minar los pocos contrapesos que hemos logrado crear, como el Instituto Federal Electoral, el Instituto Federal de Acceso a la Información, esas organizaciones que son producto de la democracia que creo que veríamos acechadas bajo un gobierno priista de regreso.
En términos de evidencia, ¿qué evidencias podríamos citar a nivel federal de que estas instituciones estarían en riesgo?
Bueno, ya lo hemos visto con el IFE. Lo vimos con la manera en la cual los partidos intentaron colocar no a personas independientes y de prestigio, sino a sus candidatos cuando hubo la renovación del instituto hace algunos años. En el IFAI ya vemos intentos por tratar de colocar, personas afines al priismo también en las reformas recientes a la Comisión Federal de Competencia. Me preocupa que veamos una nueva priización de las instituciones y esfuerzos priistas por colonizar esas instituciones imparciales de ciudadanos por simpatizantes o afiliados suyos.
¿Puedo hacer una de Denise?
Sí, claro. Yes, of course.
Just touching on what you first talked about, a lot of people say that there's a new PRI and this isn't the old PRI. How do you see that there is a new PRI? How do you respond to people who say that?
Well, I've actually read the book that Enrique Peña Nieto published under his own name, the one that he's admitted publicly that he didn't write, but he has read. And it's a book that if it were presented by any other candidate, I would be completely supportive of it because it talks a lot about competition, about opening, about private investment in Pemex. It presents a modernizing agenda, albeit with some big holes in it. There's no mention of re-election, for example. There's no mention of citizen candidacies and other elements of political reform that the PRI does not support. But why would the PRI support reforms that undermine its base? For Enrique Peña Nieto to undertake these reforms, he'd have to go against every vested interest group that explains why the party has remained in power at the state level and is such an electoral force to be contended with. He would have to take on the oil workers union, he would have to take on the electricity union, he would have to take on the teachers union, he would have to take on the monopolies that the PRI created with its ill-begotten privatization reforms in the 1980s and 1990s. So Enrique Peña Nieto, to be a force for the new for the new PRI, he would have to become a Trojan horse within his own party. He would have to go against the economic structure that the PRI created and that it still lives off. When he talks about private investment in Pemex, Mexicans should be concerned because what sense is there in allowing for private investment in a state-owned company if you don't expose that company to foreign competition? You simply transfer rents that used to go to the oil workers union to maybe somebody like Mr. Slim. That rent-seeking elite is very much alive and well, and you see it supporting Enrique Peña Nieto because they want to eliminate the word competition from the next president's vocabulary. So that's why I'm so reluctant to speak about the new PRI. Check out any campaign photo of Enrique Peña Nieto with top leaders of the party, and those top leaders of the party represent every single obstacle to structural reform and modernization in Mexico today. In the sectors that I've talked about, telecommunications, oil, energy, transportation, financial services, education, etc.
How the situation would be different if one of the candidates of the other parties, the Conservative National Action or the leftist PRD, would be elected?
Well, I say this as a member of a growing constituency in Mexico, that of the undecided independent voter, who basically is politically orphaned in this election because we have no one to vote for. I think the left-wing PRD would be more of a challenge to the status quo, but not necessarily a good challenge because it is a party that also hasn't modernized itself. I think that Andrés Manuel López Obrador had the chance to turn himself into the Mexican Lula, and he still hasn't been able to do so because I think he has his diagnosis of what ails Mexico is correct, but I don't think he has the appropriate solutions. He's not a man who understands how an economy works. He is averse to dismantling monopolies because he's basically a statist at heart. He has just announced that Pemex would be headed by the son of the president who nationalized the oil industry, which sounds politically correct, but doesn't augur for great changes within that such a crucial sector for Mexico's development. As for the National Action Party, I think it's going to be booted out of office in all likelihood because of what little it has been able to, because there were very grand ambitions that accompanied the democratic transition, and I think the PAN has failed to live up to those expectations for reform and change. I think the National Action Party, in too many cases, was willing to pact with the PRI instead of exposing it. Both Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón sought to collaborate with the PRI instead of denouncing it, and therefore the PAN is co-responsible for the return of the PRI because it didn't stop it in time. And now, and also the National Action Party, oiga, disculpe, es que no, the National Action Party in many ways emulated the PRI in the way in which it conducted itself in government, supporting corporatist leaders, supporting corrupt oil union leaders, entering into an electoral alliance with El Becer Gordillo, the head of the teachers union. And in many ways, the PAN will be punished for what are perceived as 2 sexenios of wasted time and of failed reforms or of minimalist reforms. And more specifically, I think the National Action Party will be punished for the 50,000 dead of the drug war. That is what weighs most heavily, I think, in the punishment vote that Felipe Calderón will be the object of, a drug war that many consider, according to the polls, to be a failed effort, even though the population supports Felipe Calderón and gives him, relatively good marks for his efforts. The same is not true of how people view the results, and those results are highly questionable. A country in which the homicide index, doubled in 2009, doubled in 2010, doubled in 2011. And I think that's going to be Calderón's legacy, even though there are other good things that could be said, particularly regarding macroeconomic stability and sound financial management, and the Programa Oportunidades and the extension of healthcare and the Seguro Popular and other feathers in his cap. I think all of that will be completely obliterated by the impact of the drug war.
On that point about the drug war, how does Peña Nieto articulate the vision as the PRI? What's the PRI going to do with that?
I think the presidential candidates are shying away from the issue of alternatives to Calderón's strategy. This is the one topic that no presidential candidate wants to touch, and they don't want to touch it because they don't have an alternative. Josefina Vázquez Mota speaks of doing more regarding money laundering. Peña Nieto talks about a national police, which is pretty much what Calderón has talked about as well. Peña Nieto has said that the army will stay until there is a national police put into place. So in that book, the weakest chapter by far was the one on security. And I think it's because Peña Nieto, as well as the other candidates, do not have a vision or a strategy that differs dramatically from the one that Calderón put into place. I personally think that Mexico can continue to muddle through with increasingly high levels of violence, or it only has 2 other options. One is to legalize the consumption, for example, of marijuana, or the other is to Colombianize. And by that I mean demanding for greater U.S. presence, military presence in Mexico through training, intelligence, and actually, as it happened in Colombia, the presence of U.S. military on the ground in Mexico, which I think would be very unappetizing for many Mexicans, given sovereignty issues and given our history with the U.S. But I believe that Mexico, in the face of this unwinnable war, only has those 2 very bad options.
You have mentioned that the drug war is one of the most important elements for this election because of the desire to punish Calderón's office. But what about personality of the candidates? How much the personal appeal of somebody like Peña Nieto?
Well, I think Peña Nieto is ahead in the polls because he is a product of a very deliberate public relations strategy and a very deliberate media strategy that Televisa put into play over 5 years ago. He is the candidate of the TV networks. He is a product that has been created. Who knew who Peña Nieto was 6 years ago? He comes out of nowhere, and he's been groomed for office through a very elaborate, expensive effort on the part of Televisa to to build up a product that is telegenic. He is handsome, according to some Mexican women. He has a wife who is more popular than he is, a famous telenovela actress. He presents himself as a family man, and he has been carefully guarded and carefully conceived. Now the problem he faces is that he's thrust onto the national stage where questions are a lot tougher, and he has frequently shown that he is not up to the task of answering questions that entail building a whole sentence, una oración con sujeto, verbo y predicado. And I think that's why he's being so protected, and that's why you're going to only see the presidential debates on, the smaller networks vis-a-vis Canal 2, which is el Canal de las Estrellas, the most influential political platform in the country. And competing with soccer. But elections these days are won or lost in the media, and he is very much a product of the media.
Hace unos días se refirió a los candidatos como fruta podrida o algo así.
Sí.
¿A qué se refiere exactamente?
Sí. Yo fui una de las... ¿Quieres que te conteste en español?
Por favor.
Sí. Yo fui una de las proponentes en la elección del 2009 del voto nulo, de la anulación del voto, porque me parecía que en esa elección teníamos la oportunidad de empujar una agenda de reforma política que incluía la reelección, las candidaturas ciudadanas, el referéndum, el plebiscito. Y de hecho el voto nulo tuvo un impacto importante y ya esos temas forman parte de la agenda política y de una serie de reformas que están por aprobarse en el Congreso. Anular la elección, anular el voto en una elección presidencial en la que gana alguien, aunque sea por un voto, es equivalente a regalarle tu voto al puntero, y yo no estoy dispuesta a regalarle mi voto a Enrique Peña Nieto. Pero eso implica que solo me quedan otras opciones. ¿Y por qué me refería a ellas como la fruta podrida en el mercado? Pues porque tenemos un mercado electoral, una democracia disfuncional que en lugar de ofrecer fruta fresca, ofrece fruta podrida, ofrece candidatos reciclados, como es el caso de Andrés Manuel López Obrador, u ofrece candidatos que no están a la altura de las circunstancias que el país requiere, como es Josefina Vázquez Mota, u ofrece candidatos inteligentes pero irrelevantes, como es, y afiliados a una organización maloliente, como es el caso de Cuadri. Pero pues esa es la única fruta que este mercado ofrece, y habrá que ir a votar por uno de ellos, aunque sea tapándose la nariz. Sí.
¿Y crees entonces que las candidaturas independientes o ciudadanas nos den mejor fruta?
Yo creo que sí, pero pues no se aprobaron a tiempo, y los partidos no las aprobaron a tiempo de manera deliberada. O sea, porque si las hubieran aprobado a tiempo, Manuel Cloutier sería candidato independiente y estaría en la escena nacional como un hombre inteligente, con visión, contribuyendo a ensanchar los márgenes de nuestra democracia delgada. Se van a aprobar, yo creo, las candidaturas independientes, pero van a poder usarse, digamos, hasta la siguiente ronda presidencial, que será dentro de 6 años. O sea, hay de alguna manera que airear este sistema político claustrofóbico, partidocrático, monopolizado por los partidos, y de ahí que ofrezca candidatos de tan baja calidad.
Hay un dicho que dice que las personas tienen el país tiene la democracia que se merece. En ese sentido, ¿de qué forma reflejan los candidatos la circunstancia actual de la sociedad mexicana y los debates que se dan?
Yo siempre digo que los idiotas gobiernan porque otros idiotas votan por ellos. Y en México hay un gran segmento de la población idiotizada que subcontrata el destino de su país a tlatoanis o a mesías o a redentores que ofrecen salvar a los ciudadanos de la onerosa responsabilidad de tener que participar en la cosa pública. y creo que hay demasiados mexicanos apáticos, cínicos, ajenos a la cosa pública, que no saben cómo comportar, que no entienden sus derechos y además no saben cómo defenderlos. Creo que uno de los peores legados de 71 años de priismo fue dejar tras de sí un país de ciudadanos que no conocen sus derechos y no saben cómo pelear por ellos y que están acostumbrados a pensar que la salvación se encuentra detrás de la banda presidencial, que si votamos ahora sí por la persona correcta, por el copete electrónico o por la primera mujer, que ahora sí nos salvará. Y creo que los buenos gobiernos se construyen a base de buenos ciudadanos. En México hay mal gobierno y hay mala sociedad.
En las encuestas hay un gran margen que no se ha decidido por quién votar. ¿Usted piensa que esta incertidumbre o profunda hartazgo lleve a un efecto negativo o positivo en el día de las elecciones?
Yo creo que lamentablemente va a haber un alto grado de abstencionismo de electores independientes que se van a quedar en su casa porque no van a saber por quién votar. Porque, ¿qué está pasando en México? Que los partidos tienen su voto duro y movilizan a ese voto el día de las elecciones, pero no se dan cuenta que hay un electorado cada vez más sofisticado, más independiente, moderado, centrista, que se encuentra políticamente sin opciones. Y al no encontrar opciones, o vota por la fruta menos podrida o se queda en su casa. Y yo creo que esas van a ser las opciones. Y me imagino que muchos se quedarán en su casa, aunque no deberían hacerlo.
¿Tienes cifras que puedan estimar cuál sería el porcentaje de...
Sí, según la última encuesta de Reforma, creo que el 23% de la población. Yo tiendo a pensar que es más bien como un 30%. Pero según la encuesta que cito de Reforma, entre 21 y 23% de la población se declara en este momento independiente, políticamente independiente. No es una cifra baja. Sí.
Es la primera vez que se van a realizar votaciones en el extranjero a nivel federal. ¿Usted cómo piensa que, qué opina al respecto y cómo piensa que los mexicanos en el extranjero conocen las propuestas de los candidatos?
Pues a través de la televisión, como lo hace el 98% de la población mexicana que recibe su información política a través de la televisión, que a mi juicio es una de las principales fuentes de desinformación del país. Siempre digo en mis conferencias que lo primero que los mexicanos deberían hacer es apagar la televisión, perdón, por quien está aquí de Televisa, apagar la televisión y ponerse a leer sobre su país. ¿Cómo van a votar los mexicanos en el extranjero? Pues yo creo que siguiendo, como lo han hecho anteriormente, según lo revelan las encuestas, básicamente mimetizando las encuestas a nivel nacional. Y en ese caso el PRI será el ganador incluso del voto en el extranjero.
The first question, can I just ask it again? And you said in English, you were talking about how important the elections were, the Putinization of the elections.
Yeah, but didn't I say it in English? I did say
it in Spanish.
Oh.
And then the nostalgia that people had for the PRI and the mano dura.
Yeah. What I think we're witnessing is what I call the Putinization of Mexico. Today, democracy in Mexico is associated with anarchy, with chaos, with lawlessness, and because of that, many Mexicans seem willing to sacrifice their hard-won democratic gains for the sake of a firm hand, someone to reimpose order, even if that order is a corrupt one. And that's why I compare Mexico to Russia under Yeltsin, at a crucial time in the country in which people, instead of voting to perpetuate democracy, voted for the reestablishment of the old order simply because it promised a firm hand. And I think Mexicans are nostalgic for those authoritarian times in which, yes, there was a corrupt order, but nonetheless a sense of order. And there's a perception, I think a false one, that the PRI can reestablish that order because Se necesita un ladrón para capturar a otro ladrón. You need a thief to catch another thief. And I think that the underlying argument that the PRI is making is that it will be able to pact with organized criminals and cartels as it did in the past, in the 1980s, when cartels operated without restrictions in Mexico, but with the explicit pact that they do not kill civilians. Well, that pact was broken in the 1990s and more specifically by Felipe Calderón, taking the drug cartels on. But now you've witnessed a dispersion of them. It's as if he had kicked a hornet's nest or stepped on mercury. And you see the dispersal of organized criminals throughout the country. I think it's going to be very hard for the PRI to pact. But nonetheless, the perception that the PRI could do better at containing organized crime is one that is pervasive in Mexico today.
Baja California is the first state that was ruled by PAN, and now when you go and see the streets, there is not as much presence as you would expect from a panista state. What sort of opportunities have been lost by the ruling party and Josefina Vázquez-Montt?
I think the opportunity to fundamentally change Mexico. The PAN didn't know how to take on the old regime in an intelligent way. The PAN ended up on too many occasions courting the PRI because both Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón believed that it was necessary to get the PRI's support for the passage of structural reforms in Congress. And instead of taking on the old party and exposing it, they ended up trying to bring it to the table to negotiate. Vicente Fox failed to do so, and no reforms were passed under his administration. Calderón was more successful, and you saw 5 reforms that he now alludes to as great successes of his administration, but they were reforms that were ultimately so diluted by the PRI that by the time they were approved, they had no impact whatsoever on economic growth or employment, which are the fundamental reasons why those reforms were implemented. So I think the sense that the PAN has governed too much like the PRI is widespread. And as Jorge Castañeda says, pa priistas en el gobierno, mejor el PRI. I think many people are starting to believe that if the PAN is going to govern exactly as the PRI did, empowering clienteles and perpetuating privileges and providing political protection for the vintage dinosaurial class of Mexico, as the PAN has done, why should we continue to support it in office? No, and I think there's a real issue of Peña Nieto's popularity, which has been carefully constructed over the past 6 years. I mean, it's no accident that had you been in Mexico over the past 6 years, you would have, lo hubieran visto hasta en la sopa. You know, every time you turned on the television, there he was, extolling the virtues of his governorship in the state of Mexico. And, you know, his romance and subsequent marriage to La Gaviota frequently received more coverage than the war on drugs. I think there was a plan de trabajo that Televisa put into effect, and the PRI decided to buy into. We have only 5 more minutes.
So you have mentioned that Peña Nieto is a media product, What do TV stations or TV companies have to gain?
A lot. But essentially, the elimination of the words third open network from the rhetoric or the policy positions of the next president. The elimination of the word competition or foreign investment in the media sector for 6 years. Una presidencia a la medida de sus intereses. And what they don't want is competition. What they don't want is a third open network. What they don't want is foreign investment in the media sector. And what they do want is someone that will perpetuate their el duopolio televisivo ad infinitum. So I think there's a lot to gain. The networks realized early on that if someone like López Obrador were allowed to become president, that those privileges might actually be snatched away or nationalized or undercut by any sort of presidency interested in competition. So I think the net results of their strategy are very clear, or the net objectives of their strategy are very clear.
Could you just talk a little bit about the democratic movement in Mexico when the PAN came in? It was just like, it was a very big event.
No, but I remember the day we elected Vicente Fox. I mean, I was there at the Federal Electoral Institute, I think it was July 6th. 4th, maybe, anyway. And the sense of excitement, of change, of expectation was so widespread at the time. And I frequently say that I voted for Vicente Fox and I'm still in therapy because of what I call in my most recent book a wasted opportunity. A president who tried, you only need 3 or 4 things to understand about Vicente Fox and why his presidency was such a failed one. Frente al PRI se rajó, ante los poderes fácticos claudicó, con Andrés Manuel López Obrador se obsesionó, y con Marta Sagún se casó. So he.
Does that rhyme in English?
No, it doesn't rhyme in English, unfortunately. But what it means is that he caved vis-a-vis the vested interests of Mexico. He did not take on the veto centers such as Televisa. He allowed them to become even stronger. He became obsessed with López Obrador, which led to the desafuero and to the confrontation, the polarizing election of 2006. And he married Marta Sagún, which I think was a decisive factor in his wasted presidency because the country spent 4 years or more debating whether or not she was going to succeed him. And she exercised power through him in a way that was not beneficial for democratic consolidation in Mexico.
But didn't the drug war, at that same time there was a democratic opening move in?
Oh, absolutely. Vicente Fox did nothing to take on the drug lords in Mexico. What happened is that you saw the presidency shrink, and the poderes fácticos, the true interests that govern Mexico, begin to grow. So Fox's disempowerment led to the empowerment of who? Of union leaders, of monopolists, and of the cartels. All of the groups that took advantage of the political void created by what was in many ways an invisible presidency. Fox did not know how to use the legitimate authority of the presidency in a good way to push forward a reform agenda under his term. Unfortunately, we have no longer any more time. But last question.
I just wanted to ask quickly, in terms of Enrique Peña Nieto win, what that means for U.S., what you predict for U.S. Mexico?
Well, I think that what the U.S. wants desperately is someone who can reestablish order and control. I don't think the U.S. cares if that someone is democratic or not. I mean, it's sad to say, but I think it's the reality. And if they feel that the PRI can keep things under control without requesting further American intervention, because that's the last thing Obama wants after Afghanistan and Iraq, so be it. He may be, what is that famous phrase? Anyway, I think that the U.S. Would not express opposition to a PRI win in Mexico. The U.S. would praise Mexico for its alternancia, for its capacity to toss the bums out and choose another alternative. I am much more circumspect or much more ambivalent about that prospect. Ya no, lo lamento mucho, pero me están pidiendo que ya corte. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for coming.